Warning! This video was recorded before we got Nila's story, so I can tell you now her story is pretty awesome, and the point of this video gets proven right. Also a warning, for the majority of this video I'll be a bit negative, but the point is, it all does have a happy ending, so prepare your brain cells. Also a warning, I recorded this before I learned that Nyla is actually pronounced Nila.
Alright, sit down, buddy. We gotta talk. Originally I wanted to talk about thighs and stuff, but since then, times changed. We got a new teaser for a champion that received some mixed views. A lot of people thought she looked quite bland. But if Bel'Veth taught us anything, it's that fish can slap. And thighs can be redeemed. And Riot has one man who's been doing it for years. Well, hello there. For the last few weeks the hot topic has been Bel'Veth. From her cinematic, to her design, to her lore. If anything, she's been a massive roller coaster. But while we were absorbed in talking about her curling face, for a while we were blissfully free of Riot's last few designs. To say it simply, the trend people believe started with the Ruination kept on rolling. There is no denying Riot is making sure all of their champions have an attractive side. And that's for one simple reason, it's because those champions sell better than the rest. We have talked about that issue in the past, at this point everyone knows that. But what you may not realize is that this has been going on for longer than you think. So let's go back and let's have a look at how long it takes us to land on a champion who is not using attractiveness as a selling point. The latest champion is Bel'Veth. We will talk about her in just a moment. But for now, I think it's easy to come to the conclusion that she is using attractive aspects to become more appealing. Before her, in February 2022, we got Renata, a Cam Baron who could have been one of the already established Cam Barons, like Saita Takeda or my favorite, Spindlow. You know, characters who sell the idea of a Zonite Mafia really well. But nope, Renata it is. Before that, in January 2022, we got Zeri. Now, Zeri kinda came in out of nowhere. It's a brand new champion with no real connections to anything that's happening anywhere. And so, to connect her to the established world somewhere, they made sure she met Echo at the end of her story. They also made Renata her main rival. Before that, in September 2021, we got Vex. I know she's a Yordle, but she's supposed to be a creepy Yordle. Totally different from all the other happy Yordles we got. That's why she's pretty like everyone else. Before that, in July 2021, we got Akshan, a shirtless Shuriman superhero. Before that, in April, we got Gwen, a living doll that looks exactly nothing like a doll. Then in January, there was Viego, the one who started the trend. Right? So of course he's shirtless. But there's a twist. That's not where the attractive trend started. We go further beyond that to find Rel. Now, Rel is underaged. Let's not comment on that. Then there is Seraphine, obviously designed to appeal both mentally and physically. Samira, because badass mercenaries have to be sexy. Yone, someone who died, was resurrected by a demon and still has a perfectly shaped body. Lilia, the literal spawn of a tree man. So why isn't she a bloody tree girl? Set, the pretty boy, Aphelios, the prettier boy, Sana, the undead soul of a sexy lady who stayed sexy even after being flayed alive, Kiana, the sexy leader of an entire nation, Yumi, the magical cat that was designed to appeal with her cuteness, Silas, the criminal who is both buff and shirtless, Nico, an ancestor that is supposed to represent the animalistic side of Ionia's ancestors, you know, before they started breeding with humans. So why does she have a human face? And finally we get to May of 2018, when we got Pike. The last champion who was not designed to be cute, attractive or appeal with his appearance. I'm serious, zip up your pants. So really, if you think about it, we haven't had a champion that would focus on high fantasy instead of appearance since 2018. And if you ask me, that's exactly why, personally, I don't give a damn about new champions these days. New champions hardly bring any new content to the game. And they especially get forgettable if they don't focus on their fantasy. And I really mean it. The word fantasy is the key here. There is the constant arguing of sexy ladies against monster champions. But monster champions are not really the point for me. It's the fantasy. Runeterra is primarily a fantasy world. But for fantasy we're being kept quite low. Anyway, when it comes to new champions, to me, the lore is far more interesting than the champion themselves. And I don't understand why Riot is so focused on these mostly generic stereotypes. Riot were the kings of screwing with your expectations. We never got a pyromancer wizard, but we got a walking corpse with pyromantic abilities. We never got a proper elf-like archer, but we did get a frost archer and then also a cursed archer. You see, Riot was really good at taking stereotypes and making them interesting. But now it seems to be backfiring a little bit. It seems like they are taking a fantasy stereotype, then they are slapping some kind of a twist on them, but they are focusing on the twist and totally forgetting about the fantasy. And I know that Riot can do better. Their world is rich with potential. If you don't believe me, let me give you a list of characters who are already established in the world and who would be far more interesting than someone like Zeri or Akshan. There is Kryl the Minotaur, a Minotaur of Demacia who fought side by side with Garen in the Garen novella. He's a wholesome fella who decided to leave the squad and help settle a village. I don't see why we couldn't get him. And don't tell me it's because Alistar is already a Minotaur. Get out with that argument because we have 115 human champions. I think Riot can distinguish 2 Minotaurs. And what about Grubgreg the Hideous, the most legendary troll of the Freljord, who also tried to trick Ornn? We don't really know what happened to him, so we can get him back. And once again, I don't care that Trundle is already a troll. This is a fantasy world. We can have hundreds of humans, we can have 15 Yordles, so yeah, we can have 2 trolls. Also, why is Necrit more visually interesting than most of the new champions? Look away from the abs window. And what about the Draklorn? Warriors in one of the coolest armies I have ever seen. Make one of them a champion, but keep their helmet on. I wouldn't give 2 craps about their perfect face. And for the love of God, please give us more Darkin. The stories already revealed a dozen of them. From Birdman to Turtle Ascended to Lion Darkin. The Darkin are supposed to be the malformed animalistic Ascended. You have so much freedom there. So yeah, Runeterra is far more than just dressed humans. I feel like Riot just forgot that Runeterra is a fantasy world with warriors and dragon slayers and... My god, just give me one badass warrior! Speaking of which, let me hit you with a fact. Even though we are in a universe where nations are constantly at war, and where everyone is constantly fighting some kind of evil, you would expect people to be properly armed and armored. But the last time we got a proper fighter, and I mean a proper warrior who is fighting for some kind of a purpose, was either Yasuo... Can you count him as a warrior? That was in 2013, but I don't personally count him as a proper warrior. 6 months before him we got Aatrox. He's a pretty good one. But actually, the last time we got a high fantasy warrior of a nation was Draven and Darius in 2012. That was the last time we got an armored soldier. And I don't count Mordekaiser or any of the reworks, because technically all of those are just older champion designs that came even earlier. So yeah, forget the fact that Shreema has an army of elite warriors. Forget the fact that the Freljord has one of the most interesting armies in the world. Forget the fact that Noxus, the greatest war machine in history, has the most badass warriors in Runeterra. Forget all those amazing designs from Legends of Runeterra. Forget them all, because unless they have a sexy Squidward underneath that helm, it's not worth my time. Also, did you know? Out of the last 10 champions, only 2 were male. Both very much sexy, of course. But that's not even counting Nyla. Nyla is gonna be number 11. Now, I understand that Riot is trying to represent all genders in their game. I am totally fine with that. But Riot, you are getting dangerously close to Genshin Impact. Please turn down the uwu. In short, Riot, I don't really care about pretty faces from new places anymore. I have seen you release 120 champions. I wanna see more characters from the fantasy world we already know. You've been establishing the fantasy world of Runeterra for so long, so just give us that fantasy. Channel your inner D&D and take us back to your fantasy. Because right now, you're playing into the fantasy of putting me to sleep. Anyway, at this point, many of you may be a bit confused. Technically, the entire world Riot made is their own fantasy, so what's wrong with that? I'm just saying we don't have any badasses. And this is where we finally get to talk about Belveth. After years and years, we finally got a new Void champion. A monstrous villain rivaling all the other Voidborn. And what did she get? A pretty face and thighs the size of my uncle's debt. At this point, people know that I'm actually fine with her design. It's good. But I hate that all the attention of her awesome design is her head. The way her horns outline a window that focuses on her head. The way how at the end of her teasers she was teased with her head. The way they changed her in-game icon to her head. And when it came to her cinematic, they were like, ha! The head is a lie! She's been a monster the entire time! Now, admittedly, that did look cool. But you can't serve me a plate of carrots, let me eat half of them, and then be like, ha! There is a steak in the middle of it! Belveth currently has two issues. Despite being a monster champion, her monster side is never utilized. She is always a pretty lady that unfolds into a manta ray. So at this point, it is as if she never was a proper monster. It's like when J.K. Rowling came out and said that Dumbledore was gay the entire time. That fact never mattered, so it's not going to change who the character is. And in the case of Belveth, this is underlined by her other issue. Her in-game model is not based around the monstrous side. She was animated with her head in mind. But more than that, she was animated with her head being the focus. This means that even after her head hides and you can only see her body, it still doesn't look like that's her body. Her real mouth is not animated to respond to her moves. But worse than that, her mouth doesn't actually have a mouth hole. In the cinematic, that's what sold her true form. That's what actually made her look like that's her face, an actual mouth. In-game, it's not there at all. Also, her eyes are way too far apart and it doesn't actually resemble eyes. She just looks like a turtle that decided to hide its head. So if you ask me, even though Riot is really trying to tell us that she's a big bad monster, none of the actually marketed parts show that. And don't get me started on her skin. Ah, that's the universe telling me it's time to talk about thighs. So yeah, another part of her that made me lose it was her splash art. Of course, the focus of the splash art is her head. Once again, that's how it's framed. But you can also see that her wing is conveniently folded to look like massive thighs, which is obviously there to appeal to players and make her look more attractive. Just like all the previous champions up to Pike. Now, Riot knew that we knew that she was a monster. So if they knew that we knew, why did they still try to fake her sexiness? Again, obviously it's because sexiness sells, and Riot even proved it themselves. Compare this to the art we got on her official lore. The lore is based on how good the actual story is. Appearance doesn't really matter. So they actually decided to show us who Belveth is. So this is how you sell a monster. This should have been her splash art. This proves that you can market a monster. Except Riot proved us they can't. They can't market a monster properly, that's why they gave us this. A big circle that led us back to where it all started. Good champion design that is heavily watered down by sexiness. And this brings us to the very core of this video. Riot introduced a brand new champion from a brand new region, from the other side of the planet. And instead of revealing the high fantasy of the other side, we get Pretty Lady number 116. If you look at her, there is literally nothing that tells me she is from a wild, unexplored place. Even Viego was better because he had the hidden draconic elements. Because Kamavor had dragons. She? I don't know what they have, but the saturation is turned up to 11. What's even weirder is that the teaser for the new champion looked amazing. Look at all those people, look at the giant blades they carry on their hips. Look at the awesome cloaks they are wearing. They are wearing ponchos unlike anything we had seen. So where are they? Nyla was described as a wandering stranger from a distant land. Foolish of me to think that she's an actual stranger. But who knows? We only got to see her trailer. So maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised. Because there is one shining light in all the darkness. As I hinted with my analogies, it seems like Riot is trying to squeeze as much sexiness from places they have not been before. And so far they've been getting successful. But at this point they are really pushing their limits. Like it or not, Renata is a sexy champion. But she works because we have never seen a sexy Cam Baron. And quite frankly, she works because of her lore. Vex was supposed to be a depressed emo Yordle. One that is trying to figure out how to die. Because Yordles can't die and she hates living. Sounds dreadful, right? Well, she still looks like an attractive emo girl. And you know why it works? It's because of her lore. Bel'Veth was supposed to be the end of all things. A mistake spawned by merging of reality and the void. A monstrosity beyond human comprehension. An entity themed after the horrors of the Watchers. But she still has a sexy head. And it works. Because of her lore. And this is where we have to talk about an unsung hero. A Rioter who has been secretly grabbing questionable designs, feeding them dark eldritch horror, and then release them back. Changed, but much greater than what they were before. The man who gives nipples a reason. Jared f***ing Rosen. Every time League of Legends came up with a questionable design for a champion, this guy comes in, turns the table and then suplexes the champion onto that table. No matter how much some people don't like the champion's designs, he always gives everything a reason. And he single-handedly saves bad design. That's why he was promoted to a principal writer at Riot Games. Fun fact, that's not where he started. I think he was around the creator support at first because I met him at Riot. But he actually first started by writing lore for skins. And he was so good at it, he then made it onto the main universe. In fact, if you go years back, you might find a video on my channel that's talking about Ezreal, specifically Pulsefire Ezreal and how that skin line gave all the other skins sense. Well, that's because Jared Rosen was the guy who wrote the lore for Pulsefire Ezreal. And in the process, he managed to connect all the alternative universes. Also, he's the guy behind the Covenants and some of the old High Noon stuff. And so much more. But now you may be asking, well, how is this guy single-handedly saving entire champion designs? Well, let me show you. While Fiddlesticks is cool visually on its own, Jared was the one who wrote the voice lines. And in the process, he also made this tiny thing. The entire architecture of the demonic lore. Yes, he basically invented a new piece of reality on Runeterra to give Fiddlesticks a reason. He is also the one who wrote one of the most beloved events in League of Legends. Spirit Blossom. Also Dream Daddy. It all makes sense now. He also worked on the story of Viego. He's the one who casually came up with the history of Kamavor. And once again, in the process, he invented Kamavor as its own separate region, complete with its fauna and magic. In the past, he also teased that the Blade of the Ruined King is absorbing the soul of its wielder. You know, stuff like that. But then recently, he wrote the Feast for the Prophet, and he's the one who pulled off Bel'Veth's lore. Now, you probably don't realize what a feat this is. What happened is that the designers came up with the design of the champion, and they started working on the visuals. If you go through the insight post, you can see that Bel'Veth was technically supposed to be a sexy voidy queen from the very beginning. So then Jared Rosen came in, and he had to figure out how to make her sexy side look natural. How to make her attractiveness work among all the other monsters. And against all odds, he pulled it off. Of course, he didn't do it alone. For example, Laurie Golding has been setting up the lore of the Watchers for years now. But Jared had to take all the established lore and utilize it for Belveth. And so, after looking at her appearance, he gave it a reason by making sure the human parts actually come from humans. You don't like her head? Well, actually, her head mutated on her body after consuming cities worth of humans. It was the genetic information she absorbed. So you think she chose her sexy side? Well, actually, she didn't necessarily choose the appearance. The lore mentions that the void mutates from its perfect form against its own will. So it's not really like she had a choice. And this is the brilliance of her lore. Every single piece of her that we rather wouldn't see makes sense. And it makes sense because of her lore. Her head, her thighs, her cockiness, it all comes from humans. That's what she absorbed with all the DNA. Which, by the way, in her lore she mentions to Kaisa that she is unstoppable. She did the calculations and she found out that humanity can't stop her. Well, what Belveth doesn't realize is that she's using the brain power of hundreds of thousands of humans. Even though such weapons to kill the Voidborn are beyond the human comprehension. So should Belveth ever get into the MMO, I think someone like Aurelian will know how to defeat her. All in all, in the end, Belveth does make sense because of her story. It is the writers who managed to redeem a sexy champion once again. And now we are left wondering, will Nyla suffer the same fate? Will her story also redeem her from her boring first impressions? Most definitely! You see, Jared Rosen is also working on her. She called her watery power source a demon, which already starts to make a lot of sense. She was confirmed to be from the same continent as Camavor, which also starts to make a lot of sense. And she had an encounter with Graves, who is gay, so that one doesn't make sense. But what we could learn is the origins of her demon. Right now, some people speculate that it is some kind of a demon of joy. This would absolutely make sense, since demons tend to feed on some specific emotions. So maybe the demon wants her to feel joyous all the time so that it could feed. But it can also be any one of the other already established demons. The demonic compendium also names delirium or bliss, both of which can tie into joy. It would be cool if the demon hid reality from Nyla, so that he would make her blissful of the awful stuff, and that's why she would be joyful. But I don't think that's gonna be the case. Maybe the demon just really wants to feed on joy, but it does have some kind of a really horrible twist. I mean, Twisted Fate also mentioned that she has a laughing jar. I think that's the demonic orb, so the demon itself has to be joyous too. If anything though, the lore should reveal what she's doing in Bilgewater. Right now, we have no reason for her to be there. And as I mentioned in the last video, I wonder if that creature is somehow related to the Hullbreaker, the beast after which the item is named. You can see that the Kraken worm in the cinematic is using the exact same model. Also, since she's supposed to be from the east, from the same continent as Camavor, maybe Riot is finally going to update the map of Runeterra. Maybe old Mordekaiser won't be tied to the Shadow Isles anymore. But that's really all the things I wanted to mention. While the champion designs have not been amazing lately, the narrative team seems to be saving their butts. From manta rays to sugar daddies, they are the unsung heroes. So I'm looking forward to the moment they explain, why doesn't Nyla have one of the awesome blades?